Hello, and welcome back to Working with Community Conflict. This session is on power. In other sessions, we've talked about power when looking at the dangers of a single story, and also when considering Meslin's ideas around barriers to participation. Here, we're going to trace thinking around power as it's developed over time, and consider what implications this has for how we each live our lives now.
Let's consider power here in this photo. This is a clash between police and miners in the 80s. What kinds of power can you see? So what is obvious is that there is the granted power that goes with the uniform. You have the police there who are given the power to maintain social order. And in fact, that is often known or thought of as enforced power, where one group is got the state right, as it were, to hold the peace and to make sure that other groups fall in line with society rules. There's a power in symbols, and here one of the symbols on display is the uniform. The uniform means I have the right. But there's also power in emotion and in feeling. And in fact, there's also power in numbers. And in this photograph, the police are quite heavily outnumbered by the miners, and the miners are feeling very strongly about what they have to say. And so what about here? Where is the power in this photograph? This is a picture of people shopping. But if you look hard, they don't look that happy about shopping. Why not? And if they're not happy about shopping, why are they shopping? Here, this is an illustration of peer pressure, the pressure to buy, to own, to give. This power here as coercion, acting within cultural norms, even if it's actually against your own preferences about what you'd like to be doing. So here, there's an illustration of unseen power, unseen influences, and state ideology, an idea about how things should be. We live in a very consumerist, materialist world where it is important that we continue to shop at all times in order to keep our economies on the go. There's another sort of power here too. There's power in the physical structures that are surrounding us. And if you think about large-scale state buildings, or religious buildings of one sort or another, these are actually built to demonstrate a form of power. They say we are here, our thinking is important, take us seriously. So in this picture here we have different sorts of power on display. We have the power of consumerism at work, and we also have the power of our physical environment to influence how we think and act. So what is power? Well, as I think we can already see, it is no one thing, and it operates in different ways at different times. If you look in the additional materials folder, you'll see another PowerPoint which you can watch, which goes into the theorist's thinking of power in more detail. On this slide and in this session, we're going to look at it as a quick run through. But we're going to start really with the idea which was first clearly articulated by Marx of structural power, of the idea of power being about one class ruling over another, being located into the hands of the ruling classes. In that idea of power, power was almost a thing. People thought of it almost as a commodity, something that you could get your hands on. As time went on, people began to think that that was a bit simplistic. In fact, the 1968 revolutions in Paris and beyond demonstrated very, very clearly that while people could really rise up in order to change a social order, actually not that much changed. So people started thinking about power in different ways. How is it brought about? And Michel Foucault, for example, who is a very famous thinker, French thinker around power, talked about technologies of power, actually how it operated. There was the idea that power was a discourse. It was located in the stories and the rules that we tell each other during daily life. So the idea is that the symbols that surround us, the images in our lives, actually reinforce our rules. If you think of the idea of your mother saying to you, "Don't spit on the street, dear, it's disgusting," whereas other cultures are quite happy with spitting. That idea of spitting is a discourse then, and it's linked not only to the doing of it, but also a value judgment about it. It's disgusting. Power is also now largely considered as a form of self-censorship, getting people to behave how you want them to. And interestingly, that idea is rooted right back to the 18th century and an English philosopher called Jeremy Bentham. Bentham was an influential social philosopher and thinker, and he was very involved with the utilitarian movement, the idea that in fact, if you're going to build a social order, it needs to do the best for the most number of people at any time. Among his many ideas he had was the panopticon, which you can see here on this page. And the idea about the panopticon was that somebody who was standing in the centre of this building could watch any number of people that were in the cells in a prison that surrounded him, the idea of a watchtower. He described this idea as a new mode of obtaining power of mind over mind. And what he was really saying was, at any one time, the watchman could be looking into the cells of the prisoners, but the prisoners never knew when he was looking. And so they began to control their own behaviour. Up on the other side of the page is a picture of a prison in Cuba that was operating until very recently, based on exactly that principle. Although our prisons may not be built on that design now, just take a step back and think about CCTVs. The UK is the most CCTV place in the world. That means that all our actions are on display at all times. And one of the points of that is, whether those cameras are on or off, we never know. And so, if we know there's a camera, we will control our actions. Following on from that idea of discourses and that internalised version of power, coercion that's working from inside, power began to be described by people like Bourdieu and Foucault as a set of relationships. The idea of power relations. Power isn't a thing to grab, but it's about the space between two individuals and how they relate to each other. An English philosopher, Lukes, is still thinking about power today and writing about how power actually lies in language and action, which is behind all that we do. And these ideas of policing and self-policing through discourses are really significant in the way that we operate in our world. For example, who makes young women be so anxious about the way they look? Or who makes young men decide to fight on the streets for a territory? Who makes people shop when they're broke and tired? How do these things work? And why do we do these things against our own best interests?
We're going to take some time to think about people you've tried to get involved in some form of activity over the years. What stops them? Or who are the people who engage in community activity? What are the characteristics that they have or share? You may want to think back to the Dave Meslin film in session 2, or even watch it again. Save your thoughts to discuss with your study group, or if you are together now, take 10 minutes to share your thoughts.